Good evening, guys. Today we are going to start Spring Web MVC module. Today we are going to start our discussion related to Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC is one module available in the Spring framework. It is one module available in Spring framework. So we discussed that Spring is one application development framework. There are several modules available in the Spring framework. By using those modules, we can develop several types of applications. Spring core module to perform dependency injection, we are going to use that. Spring data JPA module, which is used to develop persistence layer. Similarly, we are having Spring Web MVC module in the Spring framework. It is one module available in Spring framework. This module is used to develop mainly two types of applications. Spring Web MVC is used to develop two types of applications, guys. What are those two types of applications we can develop by using Web MVC? First one is we can develop web applications by using Spring Web MVC, and the second one is we can develop distributed applications by using Spring Web MVC. Web applications are meant for C2B communication, customer to business communication, whereas distributed applications are used for B2B communication, which is business to business communication. So Spring Web MVC is one module that is available in the Spring framework. By using this Spring Web MVC module, we can develop two types of applications. First one is called as web application, and the second one is called as distributed application. Web applications are nothing but C2B, that is customer to business. For example, Gmail application. Gmail is one web application that customers are using that application directly to send the emails. Okay, and similarly, we can say Facebook, that is one web application. We are using the Facebook application to run the ads, to post our pictures, to post our status, like that we are using Facebook. That is a web application. And similarly, we can say Naukri is also one web application where we are using the Naukri to upload our profiles for the job trials. Like Gmail, Facebook, Naukri, these all are comes under web application. Customers will directly communicate with the application to perform the business operations. That is called as a web application. When it comes to the distributed application, business to business applications are called as distributed application. For example, if you take distributed application, Make My Trip is one web application which will communicate with IRCTC to book the train tickets. IRCTC is one application which is booking trains tickets for the passengers. So IRCTC is a government application which will provide the trains booking facility. Now, some people will communicate with IRCTC directly to book the train ticket. Some people will communicate with the Make My Trip to book the train ticket. If you use Make My Trip to book the train ticket, Make My Trip will internally communicate with the IRCTC. Make My Trip is doing business, IRCTC also doing business. As part of the business, one application communicating with another application, such kind of applications are called as distributed applications. Such kind of applications are called as distributed applications. And one more example, when you are applying for the passport application will communicate with the Aadhaar application to verify your Aadhaar number. Now in the India, Aadhaar is mandatory for any service. So when you want to apply for a passport, it will ask your Aadhaar number. So if you give your Aadhaar number, then passport application will internally communicate with the Aadhaar application to verify your Aadhaar number is valid or not. So that means passport is application doing some business operation, Aadhaar application doing some business operation. As part of the business operation, passport application is going to communicate with the Aadhaar application. Such kind of applications are called as distributed application. So here, in order to develop web applications and distributed applications, we are going for Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC is one of the module of the Spring framework. Spring framework nothing but collection of modules. Spring framework is collection of modules, core module, AOP module, JDBC module, ORM module, web module, security module, data JPA, like that. There are several modules available. Among those modules, WebMVC is the one module. Now, what are the advantages of going for this Spring WebMVC? So, web applications, web and distributed applications development made easy. That means you can develop web applications or distributed applications very easily by using this Spring WebMVC module. Spring WebMVC module, form binding concept is the most important concept, guys. Form binding concept is available in the Spring WebMVC. Earlier, when we develop a project by using servlets, we need to capture the data from the form by using request.get parameter. Suppose my form is having 10 fields, then I need to capture the data from the form and I need to set to the object, DTO object, like request.get parameter of name, request.get parameter of email, request.get parameter of gender, request.get parameter of phone number. Like that, we need to capture the form data. But in the Spring WebMVC, whenever you submit a form, it is going to capture that form data and it will store into binding object. Form data binding to Java objects. Form data binding to Java objects is the one of the most important feature that is available in the Spring WebMVC. Form binding to Java objects, and the next one is flexibility in the form binding. What is the meaning of flexibility? Flexibility in form binding. So whenever you submit a form, that form data should be stored into an object. For example, employee ID, employee name, employee salary. Name is the string type, salary is the double type, ID is integer type. So whenever the Spring WebMVC is converting the form data into Java object, it will perform typecasting also. So generally, whenever we submit the form, from the UI, the data will go to the backend in the form of a string. Every data will be represented in the string format. But here, when you develop a form by using Spring WebMVC, it will capture the form data, it will store the form data into Java object, and it will take care of type conversions also. For example, name is coming as string. Directly it will be stored to employee name. Salary is coming as a decimal value that will come in the string format. That string should be converted to double value. That also will be taken care by Spring WebMVC. So web and distributed application development became easy with the Spring WebMVC. Form binding to the Java objects. Form data will be binded to Java objects. We no need to capture each and every field by using request.get parameter. We no need to convert the data into corresponding data type because flexibility in the form binding is available. Spring WebMVC providing form validations. Server-side validations can be done by using this Spring WebMVC module. My form is available with several fields. Phone number should contain only 10 digits. Username should be having minimum 3, maximum 8 characters. Email field should contain only email value. Such kind of form validations also. Sorry guys. Such kind of form validations also we can perform by using this Spring WebMVC. Multiple presentation technologies. So generally, earlier, people used it to develop presentation layer by using only JSP. But the Spring WebMVC supports for multiple presentation technologies. Supports multiple presentation technologies. Right? Earlier, Java people means we will use only JSP as a presentation technology. But in the Spring WebMVC, you can use JSP and you can use Timeleaf also as a presentation technology. It supports multiple presentation technologies, not a single presentation technology. Servlets will support only JSP as a presentation technology, whereas Spring supports multiple presentation technologies. Are you guys able to follow me? So here it supports multiple presentation technologies, whereas our servlets will support for only single presentation technology. Our Spring supports multiple presentation technology. Web application development became easy, and form data binding to the Java objects. Whenever user submit a form, that form data will be captured and that form data will be stored into Java object. When it is storing the form data into Java object, it is going to perform conversion. Suppose my field is data type is double, but form data is coming as a string value. The string value will be converted to decimal value, right? Now, flexibility in the form binding is available and form validations. When user give invalid data, that Spring Web MVC can perform the validation and can display error message to the user. And this Spring Web MVC supports multiple presentation technologies like JSP we can use as a presentation technology, and TimeLeaf also we can use as a presentation technology. All right. And the next thing is, as we are going to use Spring Boot to develop this web application, embedded server concept is available. Embedded servers. You no need to download and set up the server to run your application. If you create a web application by using web starter, then embedded server will be available to run your application. The default embedded server that we are getting as Apache Tomcat. If you don't want Apache Tomcat, we can change from the Tomcat to Jetty also. If you don't want the Apache Tomcat, you can change from the Tomcat to Jetty also to run your web application. So earlier, when we develop a web application by using normal Spring Web MVC, then we need to download the server and we need to deploy our application in the server. Now we are developing this web application by using Spring Web MVC with the help of Spring Boot. Right. So when you use Spring Boot to develop your web application, embedded server concept will come that is used to run your web application. So you just create the web application, server part will be taken care by Spring Boot. You no need to download and set up the server to run your application. Okay. Now, Spring Web MVC having several advantages to develop the web application, guys. These are the advantages. Application development became easy, no XML configurations. Form data binding to the Java objects is automatic feature. Flexibility in the form binding. Typecasting will be taken care. Typecasting will be done. You no need to convert the string data to decimal data, string data to integer data. That will be taken care by Spring Web MVC. Server-side form validations also we can perform. And it will support multiple presentation technologies like JSP and TimeLeaf. And the embedded server will be available, which is used to run our web application. You no need to download and set up the server. Now, here, let's understand Spring Web MVC architecture, guys. Let's understand Spring Web MVC architecture. So to understand Spring Web MVC architecture, first we need to know some concepts here. First one is dispatcher servlet. First one is dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet is going to act as a front controller. And the second one is handler mapper. Handler mapper. Third one is controller. And fourth one is model and view. Model and view. Fifth one is view resolver. Fifth one is view resolver. And the sixth one is view component. So in order to understand Spring Web MVC, in order to develop our application by using Spring Web MVC, first we need to understand these concepts in the MVC architecture. What are those concepts? First one is dispatcher servlet. Second one is handler mapper. Third one is controller. Fourth one is model and view. Fifth one is view resolver. Sixth one is view component. So like this, we are having 6 components here. Let's understand what is this dispatcher servlet. It acts as a front controller. It acts as a front controller. So it will take care of request and response. It deals with request and response. When someone is trying to access our web application developed by Spring Web MVC, that request will be received by dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will act as a front controller. Dispatcher servlet will act as a front controller to handle our request and response. Handler mapper. It will identify which request should be processed by which controller. Which controller and which method. In our application, multiple controllers will be available, and in every controller, multiple methods can be available. Login controller, registration controller, forgot password controller, dashboard controller, report controller. Like that, in one application, multiple controllers can be available. Which controller should process incoming request? That will be identified by handler mapper. Controller, it will handle request. This is also called as request handler. Controller, it will handle request. And decides response to send. Okay, whatever the request comes to our application, first that request will be taken by dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will hand over the request to handler mapper. Handler mapper will identify which request should be processed by which controller and which method in the controller. In our application, multiple controllers will be available, and one controller can have multiple methods. Which request should be processed by which controller and which controller method, that will be decided by handler mapper. Okay, once a handler mapper identify, then the request will go to controller. What the controller will do? Controller will handle the request and it decides response to send. Okay, now controller will return model and view object. It will handle the request and decides response to send using model and view object. Okay, what is a model and view? Model represents data in key value format. View represents logical file name. To display to the user. Now, controller will handle the request and controller will decide the response to send using model and view object. What is this model and view? Model represents data in key value format. Okay. Now, once the model is representing the data in the key value format, view represents logical file name, that is a view file. Is it index.jsp or is it index.timeleaf? Is it dashboard.jsp or dashboard.timeleaf? Which file should be displayed for the user as a response? That will be represented by view. In that view, which data we need to display for the user, that we are going to represent by using model. Model represents data in the form of key and value pair. View represents logical file name. Next one is view resolver. It is used to identify physical location. It is used to identify physical location of view files. In our project, in which folder our view files are available, those view files we are going to identify by using view resolver. Okay, so now next one is view component. It is used to render model data on view file. Okay, what is view component? View component is used to render model data on the view file. So in order to work with the Spring WebMVC, first we need to understand WebMVC architecture. To understand WebMVC architecture, first we need to understand these concepts. First one is dispatcher servlet. What is dispatcher servlet? Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet class in the Spring WebMVC. It is going to act as front controller. That means every request will be received by dispatcher servlet. It will perform some operation and it will give the request to the handler mapper. What the handler mapper will do? Handler mapper will identify which request should be processed by which controller and which method in the controller. What is a controller? Controller is called as the request handler. It is used to handle our request. Controller will take the request, will perform the operation, and the controller will send the response to the client by using model and view object. What is that model and view? Model represents data in key value format. View represents logical file name to display. Model represents in the form of key value. Model is nothing but a map, guys, which will represent the data in the form of key value. So where that data should display? In the view file. That view file name will be given by controller. What is the view resolver? View resolver is used to identify physical location of the view files. So in our project, in which location view files are available, that will be identified by view resolver. Then what is view? View is used to render model data on the view file. So let us see this diagrammatically, how Spring Web MVC architecture looks like. So the first one is dispatcher servlet, guys. As I told you, dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet class available in the Spring Web MVC. This dispatcher servlet will act as a front controller. This dispatcher servlet will act as a front controller. It is used to handle the request and response of our user. So user request, user response completely will be taken care by dispatcher servlet. It is a predefined servlet in the Spring Web MVC. After dispatcher servlet, then we need to talk about handler mapper. Handler mapper. Handler mapper, it is a predefined component in the Spring Web MVC, which is used to identify which request should be processed by which controller. Controller is our request handler. And here we are having view resolver and we are having view component. View resolver is available and view component is also available. Handler mapper, controller, view resolver, and view file. Got it. Now let us see how this request is going to process by our dispatcher servlet. Here handler mapper, here controller, here view resolver, and here view component will be available. Now first, client is going to send a request. When client send a request to our application, that request will come to dispatcher servlet. So whenever you create a web application by using web starter, by default dispatcher servlet will be available. Request will come to dispatcher servlet. What is a dispatcher servlet? Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet class available in the Spring Web MVC. That dispatcher servlet will act as a front controller. What is the meaning of front controller? It will take care of request and response. Every request will be received by dispatcher servlet. Whenever request comes to the dispatcher servlet, immediately dispatcher servlet will give the request to handler mapper. Immediately dispatcher servlet will give the request to handler mapper. What this handler mapper will do? This handler mapper is going to identify this request belongs to which controller. Controllers are responsible to handle the request given by the user. In our application, multiple controllers will be available. Login controller, login controller, registration controller, forgot password controller, like that. So which request should go to which controller based on the URL pattern, based on the address of the method. This handler mapper will identify which request should go to which controller, and it will give the information to the dispatcher servlet. Once it gives the information to the dispatcher servlet, then dispatcher servlet will go to that controller and will talk to that particular controller. Okay, guys. Now, first dispatcher servlet will talk to handler mapper. Then handler mapper will identify the controller and will give controller data to the dispatcher servlet. Getting my point? Dispatcher servlet will receive the request. Dispatcher servlet will give the request to handler mapper. Handler mapper will identify the controller to handle the request, will give the controller information to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet will go and call that controller method. Dispatcher servlet will go and call the controller method. Controller will handle that request. Controller will execute the logic which is required. Controller will call the service. Service will call the DAO. DAO will talk to database. That process will happen. Then finally, once the request processing is completed, then our controller is going to send the response to dispatcher servlet in the form of model and view object. Okay. Controller is going to send the data to dispatcher servlet in the form of model and view object. What is that model and view object? Model represents data in the form of key and value. View represents logical file name. View represents logical file name. Once the controller has given that view data and model data to the dispatcher servlet, then dispatcher servlet will go to view resolver and it will ask view resolver, hey view resolver, where is this view file? Controller has given me some file to display the response. Could you please tell me where that file is available? Dispatcher servlet will talk to view resolver by giving view name. Okay, guys, it will give view name to dispatch, view name to view resolver. What this view resolver will do with the view name? With this view name, dispatcher servlet is expecting physical location of the view. Where that view file is available, view resolver knows. View resolver will tell the location of the view file. View resolver will tell the location of the view file. View name is given as the input for the view resolver. View location will be given as a output from the view resolver. Okay, guys, here request data, it will provide to the controller. Controller will execute the data. Here it is going to provide URL pattern. It is going to provide URL pattern. Dispatcher servlet will receive a request. Dispatcher servlet will give the request URL pattern to handler mapper. Handler mapper will identify the controller. Handler mapper will identify the controller and will give controller data to dispatcher servlet, which controller is responsible to handle that request. Then dispatcher servlet will send that request to that particular controller. Controller will execute the logic and controller will return model and view object. Model represents data in the form of key and value. Key and value. View represents logical file. Then dispatcher servlet will send the view name to the view resolver. View resolver will apply a formula, suffix, prefix plus view name plus suffix. So it is going to apply a formula to identify physical location of the view file. Prefix will be available. That means the location where the view files are available. View name will be available, which is given by dispatcher servlet, and suffix will be available. Prefix plus view name plus suffix. It is going to identify the location of the view file. It will give the view resolver will give the view location to dispatcher servlet. Then dispatcher servlet is going to talk to view component by giving the view and model data. Once it has given that model data and view file, then view component is going to render that model data on the view file, and finally it is going to send response to the user. Here the response will be sent to the user. Here the response will be sent to the user. Are you guys able to follow me? So this is called as our Spring Web MVC architecture, guys. So if you develop a web application by using Spring Web MVC with plain Spring, or if you develop by using Spring Boot, by using all right, guys, are you able to understand? Are you guys able to understand MVC architecture now? Are you guys able to understand MVC architecture now? Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC. Got it? So this is Spring Web MVC architecture. Spring Web MVC architecture. Clear? Request. User will send a request to our application. In our application, dispatcher servlet will be available as a front controller. That is a predefined servlet. Guys, here if you observe, dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet. We no need to do anything. That is already available. You no need to do any configuration for that. Dispatcher servlet is a predefined servlet class available in the Spring Web MVC module. You no need to develop dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet is already available. You no need to configure the dispatcher servlet also because it is already available. If you create web application by using Spring Boot, then dispatcher servlet will come by default. All right. Then handler mapper. You no need to configure anything for the handler mapper. Okay, guys. You no need to configure anything for the handler mapper. Handler mapper is also a predefined component. Whenever request comes, that request will go to dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will give that request to the handler mapper. Based on the URL pattern coming in the request, dispatcher servlet will give to handler mapper. Handler mapper will identify this URL pattern belongs to which controller class method. So handler mapper is responsible to identify which request is belongs to which controller. Then handler mapper will give the controller data to the dispatcher servlet. As a handler mapper identified which controller is going to handle the request, then dispatcher servlet will go to that controller and will call that method. Controller will execute the logic and the controller will return data in the form of model and view. Whatever the data that we want to send to the user, controller will decide that data in the form of model and view. Model represents data in the form of key and value. It is like a map. Model means a map. View represents logical file name. Okay, which is JSP or which is timely file you want to return to the user, that controller will decide. Index JSP, login JSP, registration JSP, dashboard JSP, which file we want to return to the user, that will be decided by our controller. Then once the controller return that model and view object to the dispatcher, dispatcher servlet will give that view name to the view resolver. What is view resolver? View resolver is a predefined component. View resolver is a predefined component which is used to identify physical location of our view files. It is used to identify physical location of our view files. Once a view resolver identify the physical location of the view file, view resolver will give the data to dispatcher servlet. So here guys, controller has given the model data and view name. View resolver has given the physical location of the view file. That model data and view data will be given to view component. View component is going to render model data on the view file. It will give MAV, model and view. It is going to render that data. View component render. Render means whatever the data that we want to display on the view file, which is available in the model object, it will get the data from the model. It will keep the data in the view. That view will be given to dispatcher servlet. Finally, dispatcher servlet will send the response to the user. So this is how internally Spring Web applications are going to work. Okay. So entity, why entity will come into picture here? Controller will talk to service. Service will talk to DAO, right? That part is different. Controller will talk to our service component. Service will talk to DAO component, repository. Their repository will talk to entity. That is a different story. So whenever the request comes to controller, controller will internally talk to service. Service will internally talk to repository. You got it? I'm not writing that part. We are talking about pure web MVC architecture. Whenever request comes to the controller, your controller will talk to your service class. Your service class will talk to your repository interface. Repository interface will use entity and will communicate with the database. Now, in this whole diagram, we are only responsible to develop this area, guys. In this whole diagram, we are responsible to develop only this area, controller and view file. That's it. Why? Because dispatcher servlet is a predefined class. Handler mapper is predefined. View resolver is predefined. View also predefined. So as a developer, we need to create our controllers to handle the request and response. That's it. As a developer, we need to develop our controller to handle the request and response. Are you clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Yeah. Anybody having any questions on this diagram? Can you ask me now? Anybody having any questions? Can you ask me?
Sir, the view resolver, can you explain again, sir?
Sir, view resolver is a predefined component. Now, generally, in our project, Java code will be available in one folder. Presentation files will be available in some other folder, right? Okay. So where our presentation files are available, view resolver is going to identify the location. When we develop our first example, you will get more clarity.
So only the location is going to resolve, but the actual view part will take the JSP or
right. So controller will just give the name of the file. Controller don't know where the view file is available. Controller don't know what is our presentation technology, because Spring MVC supports multiple presentation technologies, right? Not only JSP. We can use a time leaf also as a presentation technology. So controller don't know which presentation technology we are using. Controller will just tell that this is the data we want to display. This is the name of the file which we need to display. Then dispatcher servlet will give that name to view resolver. View resolver will identify where that view file is available, which technology we are using for the presentation. Is it a JSP or is it a timely? That will be resolved by view resolver. It is a predefined class.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Next question. Now, can you guys tell me what is a dispatcher servlet?
Front controller.
Yeah, front controller.
Handle the request.
Dispatcher servlet is a front controller. What is the meaning of front controller?
It takes the request and response.
Complete request handling logic will be taken care by front controller. So our controller will be available and front controller will be available. Okay. Patient. Okay. Guys, fine. So I have to vacate this room. Some patients are coming here.
Oh.
So any questions? I want to wind up the session in another 5 minutes.
Yeah, the thing is, in response, in which format it will give the view?
Sir, response, it will give in the key value format. That's it.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Key value. So you know map concept in the Java, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is going to send the data in the form of key value. That the keys we are going to access in the view file. So to display the data.
Okay. Thank you.
So the handler mapper, which format will it be in XML?
Sir, it is basically a URL pattern now. So www.gmail.com/inbox. Inbox is your URL pattern. That URL pattern belongs to which controller method will be identified by handler mapper, and it is going to handle that request. Got it? Handler mapper is basically to identify which request should be handled by which controller.
Okay, sir. So file format where that handler mapper is present, sir?
No, sir. Handler mapper will not deal with any file format, right? So our controllers will be available. Controllers will have the URL pattern. Which URL pattern belongs to which controller will be identified by handler map.
Okay, it's not a config file, sir.
No need to do any configuration, because whenever we start our application, so handler mapper is going to scan what are the controller classes available, what are the URL patterns available. Based on that, it is going to identify which request should be handled by which controller.
Just like servlet mapping.
Yeah, it's like a servlet mapping.
Okay.
Sir, generally security is handled by controller only, right?
So, security is a different concept, sir. In this diagram, we are not talking about any security, right? It is a basic architecture, how the request will handle. Security, we need to discuss in the Spring security concept.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, why we need, view resolver, we can directly mention the physical address, right? Completely com dot, like prefix and suffix completely.
No, so that is a predefined Spring MVC architecture, right? We can't change that. Controller should return only file name, not the location of the file. File location will be identified by view resolver.
Okay.
Spring MVC, they want to make it loosely coupled. Suppose if controller is returning the location, controller should know the view technology, right? They want to be independent. Controller should not know what is our view technology. Because of that reason, they are supporting for multiple presentation technologies, not single presentation technology.
This diagram only for Java or supporting .NET and all?
Sir, this is Spring Web MVC. How Spring will support .NET?
Yeah. But I saw .NET also MVC structure is there, that's why.
Spring MVC is different, .NET MVC is different, sir. .NET
Okay.
MVC is a separate framework. This is
Okay.
pure Spring MVC architecture. When you are developing a web application by using Spring, these components will execute in the background.
Okay.
Sir,
Thanks.
so Spring MVC also comes under Spring Boot or core Spring, sir?
No, sir. Spring Boot is using Spring MVC internally to develop web applications.
Okay.
Normal Spring framework will use Spring Web MVC. Spring Boot also will use Spring Web MVC to develop the web application. Boot will internally use Spring Web MVC.
Okay.
Sir, in real time, what type of applications we develop by using MVC?
Any web application, any RESTful services, distributed application. Every
Sir,
web
I have one doubt. In response, it will give view page, right? That's it, now.
Sorry?
It will show JSP page something, right?
It will just give the name, sir. When I develop first application, I gave the video link also to develop the first application. One
Okay,
week back.
okay.
People did not
Okay.
try that.
Okay.
So once
Okay.
I develop the first web application, you will get more clarity on that.
Okay, sure. Okay, thank you.
Fine, guys. Thank you. With this, I'm
Hi.
stopping for today.
Hi, sir.
Hello.
Sir, today we received a message like we have RESTful web services and microservice web.
Sir, that is another faculty course, sir. So that is part. They have Spring. That is another faculty Spring Boot course. They completed Web MVC. They started RESTful. For our batch also, Web MVC will complete. Then I will start the RESTful microservice for our batch. You no need to attend.
Yeah. That's what my idea. Doubts. Thanks.
Fine, guys. Good. Thank you, guys. So please try to practice first application development. I have given the video link. Tomorrow we are going to develop our first web application by using Spring Web MVC. Today we understood theoretically what is Web MVC, what is the architecture, diagram, and we have seen. Tomorrow we will develop the first application and we will see internally how it is working. Okay? Thank you, guys. I will see you tomorrow. Until then, bye-bye. Take care. Yeah. Murali Krishna, thank you, sir. So mostly we will get discharged from a hospital tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So I'm not sure. Still, we did not get any update from the doctor. We are waiting for today only surgery completed. Tomorrow or day after tomorrow we'll get discharged. Yeah, thanks for asking. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye. Please practice first application. You understood the concept theoretically now. Please try to do it on your own before I'm going to do it in the class. I already gave the video for that. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for your blessings. Thank you.